So, what an odd day in open wheel racing qualifying today. There's no doubt about it. IndyCar at Road America in mixed conditions and a tie in Formula One, which the tiebreaker went to George Russell. First time that's happened in Formula One since 1997. But mainly, we want to focus on two things today: Road America and the happenings there, and the potentiality of a very mixed up and interesting race tomorrow for the IndyCars. And I also want to finally follow up and kind of tie a bow on the Detroit weekend, particularly talking about and answering some of the questions that we had exiting Detroit, which are: why is the layout the way it is? Will the race change? And why does it have to be after the Indianapolis 500? So let's talk about Road America first, because as I mentioned, it was a rainy qualifying session today, and the mixed conditions led to a lot of drivers getting opportunities that they typically wouldn't get. Kiffin Simpson was in the Fast 12. In fact, all of the Ganassi cars were very, very fast, but the fastest of them all was Linus Lundqvist, who qualifies on his first IndyCar pole position of his career, the first rookie to qualify in the pole since 2021, and certainly a good rebound after a tumultuous Indy 500 for Linus. So, and Marcus Armstrong right there in third. Colton Herta on the outside of the front row as well has looked impressive all week long. But obviously, the viral moment is the crash that Josef Newgarden had in the Fast Six. Now, it's important to note that he has been seen and released from the infield care center and cleared to drive tomorrow. But dropped a wheel, and the car spun out in Canada corner, or sorry, into the kink at Road America. And one of the biggest hits we've seen in quite a while on a road course. Reminded me a lot of the crash of Catherine Legg back in 2006, where the car got upside down into the catch fence and broke in half. Thankfully, it wasn't quite that severe, but certainly a very scary moment for Josef Newgarden. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the Road America race tomorrow. And if you would like to subscribe to the DL 500 Club, the link is in the description below. You can watch the race along with me. I will be providing some live commentary of it. Now, I'm not going to obviously be streaming the race. You'll have to find that elsewhere. But if you want to watch the race with me, I will be doing that tomorrow exclusively for members of the DL 500 Club. And don't worry, if you don't want to subscribe to that, I will have my race review posted either Sunday night or Monday afternoon, depending on the immediacy in which I need and require to upload that video. Also, want to quickly tie a bow, or not tie a bow, but perhaps unravel the bow a little bit more on the Agustín Canapino situation. While I can't get into specifics right now, I would say this. I think that this story is going to continue for quite a long time. We're going to be talking about it probably this week at some point as that continues to develop. A lot of things going on behind the scenes. And I'll just say this, right? You don't pull a driver out of a race where he had done an autograph session 10 minutes before, right? There was obviously things behind the scenes that were going on. And while I don't think we're going to get all of the dirt, I think some of the things are going to start coming to light, or at least what's going to come to light is what the future holds for Juncos Hollinger Racing. So we'll have to just wait and see on that one as things continue. But do want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit of Detroit, because I wanted to follow up on a video that I made, which was, why does IndyCar interest fall off after the Indy 500? And there's a whole lot of theories out there, a whole lot of talk. But one of the points that I brought up in the video is that you go from 6 million people watching the Indy 500 to the last time IndyCar had raced on USA Network in Detroit, the race got 300,000 people watching on television. Well, the good news was that after the Detroit race this year, that number doubled on USA Network. 600,000 people tuned in to Detroit on USA Network, actually one of the highest rated cable races IndyCar has had in quite a while. So that's good news, but I think we left Detroit with a lot more questions than we had answers. But thankfully, there was a press conference with some higher-ranking Penske Entertainment officials, particularly the ones responsible for the Detroit Grand Prix, and some of the questions were answered that we've had interest in knowing the answers to. And while they're not the answers I think a lot of us would like to hear, they are the answers. And so we can work from there. So this is the transcript of the press conference from Sunday night in Detroit with Bud Denker and Michael Montri of Penske Entertainment. Those are the two men who are responsible in large part for the organization of the Detroit Grand Prix. And specifically, the first question I think was of interest was that the question of how was the track designed? Why was the track designed in the way that it was? And here was Bud Denker's answer, specifically speaking about both him and Michael designing the track. But the interesting thing that Bud mentioned, you can see it here, is that you have to find a pit lane. And behind that, you have to have the 20 acres of asphalt to create the paddock. And that's what he said. The challenge of having anything in a market like this is, where do you put 1,000 feet of pit lane? Where do you have 20 acres behind it of paddock space? That limits on where you can do it. And obviously, Detroit has a pretty goofy pit lane. They had to, decide to make the pit lane the way it was because of that restriction. In fact, the current paddock area, not the pit lane, but the paddock area, is where the old front straightaway was for the racetrack that was used by Formula One between 1982 and 1990, and then taken over by the IndyCar series in 1991 before it moved to Belle Isle. There was also the talk about not disrupting businesses. The design of the track allows people to come into the city, come into the Marriott, which is in the Renaissance Center, and get out of the border crossing without disrupting our race. Because there's a border crossing. I think it's mentioned later on in this press conference that the border crossing is a big issue for racing in downtown Detroit. There was a big thing. The big note that I kind of took away from Bud Denker talking about this was that they would have loved to have gone past the horseshoe at turn 3, past the turn 3 hairpin, and down to the Huntington Place street. They didn't have enough runoff to do that. And then further confirming, we're not going to change the course. I think the course proved itself today and last year. It depends how you feel about that. I mean, some people, I did see a lot of comments in my post-race review of Detroit of people who liked the Detroit track. I mean, some people do like the chaos, right? I suppose it is a different strokes for different folks, right? I personally am not a fan of the Detroit layout as it currently is. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of making a raceable racetrack, but it's clearly not going to change because of another point, which was, and this was a question mark going into the weekend, is that the GM headquarters are going to move. The current date for that is in 2025. And Bud Denker said, I think it will stay here. There's another thing you may not know about the 375 connector, which is a highway in Detroit, is going to change in a couple of years. We're in the middle of working with the state of Michigan to determine how that's going to look in the future. The future plan would probably impact our pit area right down through the middle. Michael is involved. Our government affairs person is making sure we can still race here when they change 375, which is 2 or 3 years away, to which Michael Montri responded, at best. So there is a point where downtown Detroit is going to change, and while Bud Denker is saying the track won't change, an answer before this one, he says that in this answer, at least in a couple of years, there's a possibility that at least the pit lane would have to change. So I'm curious. There's some curious language being used there for sure. But this is the one that is, I'm pretty sure, a direct response to the video that I made. I believe this question was asked by Nathan Brown of the Indy Star. So, thanks for asking that question, Nathan. Coming off the Indy 5, I'll read Nathan's question. Coming off of the Indy 500, you've been in the shadow of a highly marketed event. There's noise online. I am the noise online about the series still promoting things coming off of that, not promoting so much going into this weekend. Well, I wasn't that guy. There was a lot of people doing that though. How does that affect this race and how it stands on its own? To which Bud Denker responded, I think it stands on its own because of the success you saw today, right? We did a lot of promotion in the marketplace and the billboards you saw around the city, socials. We had a lot of partners that did advertising for it. The other point, I moved around here in certain areas, and how many fans do you want, right? You can't put a lot more in those parking decks. Can't put more in the grandstands, which were sold out. Where do you put them? on a 1.7 mile track. So I think that was a very interesting point raised by Bud Danker, that yes, it is a very small track, but he also says, which is a weird admission for a promoter to make, but essentially he's like, we don't necessarily want more people at the race, which is an interesting one. The other part of our track is on the riverfront, which is so beautiful. How many tracks do you have where you turn around and look at the riverfront? The walkway we have here, it's one of the best in the world. Well, I would say Belle Isle was a lot like that. It's a very unique place to be. Monaco, talking about Smokey Robinson. They kind of dodged things. And then there was a more direct question behind that one. I don't remember who asked this one. It might have been Nathan, but it also might have been Wolfgang. So we'll just give them all credit. Has there been any thought to having this race in any other spot on the calendar to make way for an oval immediately after the Indy 500? And Bud said, Michael can add on to that. Really, the biggest reason, and this blew my mind, because this was almost a moment where they were more honest than I expected them to be. Because you always expect the answer is going to be this event has to be after the Indy 500 because Chevy wants it and we want it and blah, 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 blah. This was a very interesting answer from Bud Danker, and it had nothing to do with the placement on the calendar from a racing perspective. The biggest reason why we have it this week is because if we went 1 week longer, we would lose our sponsor chalet activity. School is in session in Michigan, in the Detroit area. Once they go on vacation next week, this place empties out and they all head north. We saw that for Labor Day weekend. The first 2 years with Labor Day weekend, it was hard for our sponsors, and he's referring to Labor Day weekend in Belle Isle. It was hard for our sponsors to get people here because it was the last weekend to celebrate being up north. We would lose all of that activity, corporate activity, not all of it, but a lot of it. People would be gone. That is the primary reason. Somebody asked, a couple of drivers, can't we push this back a few weeks to give them some rest after a full month at Indy? I agree it's tough. We would lose our partner's revenue. Michael Montry adds a little bit more. I would certainly add being in the middle of downtown here. You really can't just move our date at any time. We have to lock those years in advance with the city because there's a lot of planning that goes into this. This is the weekend. I agree it's a good question. We've seen a lot of those questions similarly over the years, and I would say this too. The Indy 500 is the Indy 500. The fact that there might be an oval on the calendar the next weekend doesn't mean it's going to race the same as the Indy 500 or create that type of race. You never know what type of race you're going to get. I would say that there is a track in Michigan that would race similarly to the Indianapolis 500, but the point is true. Yes, I do agree to a certain extent that yes, if you went to Gateway right after the Indy 500, it would not be the same product. It would be kind of the same problem you have in Detroit where it's too much of a culture clash. I do agree with that. And finally, Michael said, for those who tuned in last week, the first time for the Indy 500, then tuned in today, they got an entertaining race on TV, and that's what we're looking for. I don't know if 47 laps under the caution is necessarily entertaining. It's entertaining to some, for sure. Some people like to watch demolition derbies. But I do appreciate the candidness of the answers that were given at this press conference. I wish I hadn't been on a solo trip at Detroit because I was editing the video at the time. Otherwise, I definitely would have been participating in this press conference. I'm happy for the journalists who were asking the tough questions. I think everybody who participated in that one did a great job. Shout out to you guys, and thanks for getting those answers out of Penske Entertainment. And frankly, thanks to Bud and Michael for answering those questions honestly. So, looking forward to Road America tomorrow. Remember, you can check out the DL 500 Club to see my commentary of the race. And if you don't want that, you can certainly check out my race review that will be coming in the next 48 hours. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.